I am Reverend Suzanne Parker Miller. I'm the director and founder of Pastors for North Carolina Children, and I am super excited that you all are here tonight. This is a chance for us to kind of unpack what's going on in North Carolina right now and try to understand why the governor declared a state of emergency this week for public education. If you've been following public education for a while in North Carolina, that is not a surprise. It's kind of about time that we're talking about this. This is probably, in some cases, 29 years too late. We'll be talking about that in a minute, but we are thankful for the spotlight to be placed on education. And so this week, we really wanted to take some time to do two things. One, to unpack what is going on, to show you the numbers. I had the chance to do a variation of this presentation Sunday in Asheville for the Asheville City Schools Foundation, and folks who follow education were shocked at even how bad things are. And so we really want to be sure people have the information in a fun, hopefully fun way, but a chance to just see what's happening, to see the data, and then secondly, to take action, because the data by itself isn't really going to help us unless we actually put our prayers into action. And so we are going to be sharing some tips at the very end tonight and have a chance for you to actually take a moment to write a letter while you're still on the call or to make a phone call. You're going to get answering machines, so it's a great way, kind of non-threatening way to be able to do that. But we're here to help and support with that process. And we'll be talking more about our Mission Amplify program that we are currently putting forth to churches to do this very type of activity. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation as folks continue to come in. Rebecca Hewitt-Newson is on the call. She is our board president, and she's holding down the chat tonight. So if you have questions, please post those in the chat. We'll also have time to come off mute towards the end and be able to ask questions. But if you do have questions that come up, pop those in the chat. Rebecca will be doing her best to answer them as we go and share links. And then at the end, we'll be able to answer any that haven't gotten answered in the chat. So let's go ahead and get started. So tonight's presentation is Emergency Response, North Carolina Public Education's Crisis Explained, and what are we going to do about it now? So if I can get, are you all seeing the presentation? Give me a thumbs up, Rebecca, if you can see the presentation. Okay, I'm not sharing my screen. That would be part of the problem. Okay, let's try this again. Hold on. I promise I've done Zoom before, but you know. Okay, can you see it now? Okay, great. So, as I said a minute ago, we are Pastors for North Carolina Children. We are mobilizing faith communities to advocate for public education. And in the chat tonight, I'd love for you to just drop a number between 1 and 5. How familiar are you with the Leandro case? This is a helpful measure for us to know the familiarity of our audience. Usually we're all over the place, and that's great. 1, you've never heard of Leandro before. That name doesn't ring a bell at all. 5, you should be the one doing the presentation tonight instead of me. So go ahead and drop numbers in the chat if you would, and I'm going to keep going to save us a little bit of time. I know we're starting a little late, but we are Pastors for North Carolina Children is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, independent ministry here in North Carolina. We are part of a network of Pastors for Children organizations across the Southeast, and now spreading into the Midwest. So there are about 10 different states that have a Pastors for Children organization. We are based in Raleigh. I'm based in downtown, about a block and a half from the Capitol, here in our office, in the basement of Edenton Street United Methodist Church, which is one of our partner congregations that have been so gracious to give us some office space. And we work statewide. So I have done presentations now between Asheville and Manteo and everywhere in between, and look forward to coming to Wilmington in a couple weeks. And if you are looking for a group, yay, Peter, if you're looking for a presentation or somebody to come talk about public schools or how you can get involved in your congregation, my contact information will be in here. And we'll share the presentation with you over email as well. But I'm looking for congregations to invite us to come speak. So One of the great things about the work that we're doing in North Carolina is that we are in coalition. We believe in the power of coalition and people building to be able to bring systemic change to our state in public education. So we are very grateful to be able to work with Every Child North Carolina. This is a coalition of over 50 different partners from around the state who are working specifically to be sure that every single child in North Carolina receives an equitable educational opportunity to be able to thrive. We're specifically working on the Leandro case that we'll be talking about in a minute. And Sarah Montgomery from our coalition is also on the call tonight, so she'll hopefully be able to answer questions as well. So it is EOG season for those of you who have children in school, end of course exams, end of grade exams. And so I thought it'd be a little bit fun tonight to take a quiz. You're welcome to think along with it or put the answers in the chat if you'd like. So this is just a chance to get through some information quickly about North Carolina. So how many public school children do we have in North Carolina between kindergarten and 12th grade? How many students are we talking about here? I'm not going to give you long, but it's about 1.5 million children, and 80% of these kids go to traditional public schools, which we'll be talking about in a minute. How many LEAs, which are local education agencies or school districts, do we have in North Carolina? We have 115. So we have 100 counties in North Carolina, and we have 115 districts. So there's 12 counties who have more than one district, usually a city district and a county district in them. So again, here's that information, and I have links, so we'll be sharing all of this so you can find out more information. So about 1.5 million children. That's a lot of kids, guys. That's a whole lot of people. So how many support staff and teachers do we have in our schools these days? Any ideas on how many adults are helping serve in our schools? These are teachers, instructional assistants, administration, your bus drivers, your cafeteria, child nutrition folks. Not enough. Yes, Portia, absolutely in the chat. Yes. Amen. We have about 174,000 employees. About 95,000 of them are certified instructional classroom teachers that we think of, traditional classroom teachers. And we're going to be talking in a minute about the vacancy numbers, because those are startling at the moment. If you've been paying attention, you won't be that surprised. But North Carolina, schools in North Carolina are also a top employer in our state. And so out of our 100 counties, how many of the public schools are the top employer in their county? It's 46. So 46 of our 100 counties, almost half, the public school system is the top employer in the county. If you take the top 3 employers, so first, second, and third place, it is 87 counties out of 100. In the few districts that are not, it's usually because the university is larger or there's a hospital system that's larger. But education is a significant number of job producers for our counties. So in August, back at the beginning of the school year, August 26th, they did a number, showed a number of vacancies, and there were about 4,400 teacher vacancies at the start of the year. I know my 5th graders class was one of those who had a vacancy that we didn't get a teacher till about the second week of school by the time the paperwork was processed. Excuse me, that was about 4.5% of all teachers across the state. In February, there was a report run for North Carolina that we had over 5,000 vacancies in February. What's extremely significant about that is usually teacher vacancies drop after the beginning of the year as those positions are filled. This year, it was a 58% increase from the previous year at that time. because of the teacher vacancies. That is just an astounding number that we're still vacant even at in February. Then when I looked last week, this is numbers combining the 2 school years. So the ones that are still vacant for this end of the school right now and ones that are trying to be filled for the fall, we are at over 11,600 vacancies. The governor keeps touting a number in the reports I've heard this week, and I don't know where that number's coming from because that is not the number I found. His number was looking a lot better than mine. Maybe that was just classroom teachers or just this year. I'm not sure. But when I looked on ncteach.org, I think is the website, teachnc.schoolspring.com. That's it. The main state website with all the education vacancies, there were over 11,000. That's not just classroom teachers, that's additional support staff as well. But we know every single adult that's in the building is an important piece of helping our schools be able to serve our children best. And so that is really, as a parent of 2 in school, that's a really terrifying number. The other piece of this that's really scary is that the decline in students enrolling in our schools of education to fill the pipeline to replace these vacancies has also declined. Between 2021 and 22, new enrollments entering into the schools of education, freshman enrollments, was down 42%. 42% decline. There's no pipeline to fill these positions. Our schools of education at our universities in North Carolina are our #1 provider of new teachers who come into our schools. We get a few from out of state, we get a few from lateral entry, things like that. But our students graduating as teachers in our universities is our #1 place we get students, or we get new teachers. We aren't having freshmen enter education. They're just not going into it. And can you really blame them? I can't. And so this is what we're seeing, which isn't even coming close to the number of 1-to-1 replacements for the vacancies. So how much do we spend of our state budget on K-12 education? In a typical year, approximately how much do we spend? It's about 40% of our state budget. Our state budget in 2018-19, which is a bit of an old statistic, but one that we had to go on, is $9.4 billion a year spent on education from North Carolina. It is right at 40%, and it is the single largest bucket of funding that comes through our budget every 2 years in the 2-year budget cycle. So education is the biggest pot of money that they spend money on as a state. We're also educating 1.5 million children out of that money, so it's understandable. The thing that's concerning about that is when it sounds like a lot of money, and it is, I'm not discounting that, but when we look at percentages of how much we're spending on education as a percent of our whole state funding, in 1970, we were spending 52.5% of our state funding on education. That drops, and you see in 2008-09 where the arrow's pointing in the middle, that's the financial crisis. It dropped then to 37.7%. But since 2008, we have only gained 2% of an increase in spending. And we know that our state has grown dramatically since 2008, and inflation has gone up. So these numbers are not keeping pace with the growth. So how much of the funding for our school districts comes from the state in North Carolina? If you grew up in a different state, this probably will surprise you. North Carolina is pretty unique in this, the way that we fund education. It's about 64%. So public education funding does primarily come from the state, which is one of the main reasons that we're most interested in working at the state level for funding, because that is the biggest and best way to affect the local funding in the individual schools. Not local funding from the county, but just the funding in the system itself. The state is required to cover salaries and materials for most every teacher. All of the stuff, the materials and the people to be able to run the school. Now, the local supplement, your county commissioners and your local property taxes typically in your county are what cover the local supplements. So whatever if your county commissioners give an additional amount to your teachers to help offset the differences in cost of living from one county to the other, they also are required to fund the buildings and the buses, those infrastructure things that are also very important to our schools. Not every county gives a local supplement either, so keep that in mind. That is not a guarantee, and it varies widely from county to county. So the federal funding for our schools is about 10%. That covers primarily your IDEA, which is your Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and our school breakfast and lunch program that comes out of the Farm Bill, out of the Department of Agriculture, and then also our CTE classes, which are like your career and technical education. In high school, you think about kids taking shop or automotive repair or HVAC or plumbing. Those types of courses are the ones that federal government provides funding for and teachers for. So let me stop there for just a second and see if I've seen a couple questions come through the chat. So I'm curious if there's any questions that we need to ask Rebecca, or if anything that you see that we haven't been able to answer yet.
Oh, okay. So one that came through was just thinking about if where are teachers going to come even for private schools, and sort of like what does the legislature think about that and certification? And if you want to speak to that, Susanna, then there's one other question.
Yeah, one of the big differences between our public schools, our traditional public schools even, and charter schools and private schools is the requirement around teacher certification. So public schools are required to maintain a certain percentage. It's like 90%. I think I'd have to look that up exactly, but have to have, the vast majority of their teachers in certification, either fully certified or renewing that process. Charter schools are only required to have 50% of their teachers certified. So those other 50% can be anybody that they bring in and put in a classroom. Private schools, there's absolutely no requirements from the state to be able to have certified teachers in those classrooms. So they could have absolutely no training in education, but be considered a teacher in a private school. And so I guess they're planning on using non-certified non-educators to be able to be educating students. I really don't know the answer to that question. I really wish we could ask them and find out, because I guess the trend that we're seeing nationally is as we're seeing the gig economy pushed in lots of different fields, we're looking at more and more push towards the gig economy teachers, where they're, we have a substitute in the classroom and the teacher's teaching on Zoom from another location. That's happening in places. There's also teachers, who are contracted to just teach certain classes and not like a full salaried position. There's a lot of different ways. They're using a lot of things like Teach for America, where they're bringing in students for a couple years with very minimum training, and then they don't last. They don't stay in education, which is really detrimental to the school culture and relationships and things like that as well. So it's a great question. I'd love to know what they would say about that. Other question.
One other question that popped up was, where does the education lottery fit into funding? Excellent. I know the answer, but I can't wait to hear. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I should add a slide to this and to my slide deck. I need to do that. So the education lottery, oh, what a great story here. So when it was passed originally back by the Democrats in the mid 2000s, there was a provision in the bill when it was first written that said that the funding for the lottery was to be additional education money. It's the North Carolina Education Lottery. And so that was supposed to provide additional funding. Well, what happened is that by the time the bill got to the final draft, the line saying that it had required it to be additional funding was removed from the bill before the final pass of the vote. So what happened is they voted in a lottery that does not actually require the money to be additional funding. So what they do is basically, to simplify it, they take the money that the lottery brings in one door, and they move the money that's an equivalent amount out to other places through a different bucket. And so basically it's just swishing money around within the system and not actually providing additional funding for schools. The other piece of the lottery is that the amount that it brings in for education is so small that it is not actually enough to even really make a big drop in the overall spending for schools, the overall necessity of the 9.4 billion. It's about 100 to 200 million a year, which is just a very, very small percentage. They do spend that money on schools and education, so they're not lying. It's just that it's not actually additional funding. So it's a great story. Gotta love the education lottery. As you can tell, I'm not a big fan. So
one more question came in,
yes,
because it's about funding. So I apologize if I am not pronouncing your name correctly, but I'm guessing Renata Lee says, is any part of the 84.3% of the budget going toward voucher scholarships for parents who wish to send their child to a private or charter school? And the budget as it stands now, I'm guessing is what we're asking.
I think that's what they're asking, and we will get to the voucher spending in just a minute. If you can hang on, we're getting there. So we'll be there in just a minute. So overall funding for schools has decreased between 2008-09 and 2021 by how much? When we take in those increases in students and inflation, which inflation right now is sitting at about 8%. How much has our budget decreased? It's about 6%. So while you'll hear lots of ads on television during the political season and election season about we're spending more on education than ever. Yes, we are, but we're also educating more children than ever. And at the rate of that, plus the increases in inflation, we are spending less proportionally than we ever have in this time frame. And so while they're not lying, they're not telling the full truth. And that's a nonpartisan statement that goes for both parties. We have to fact check and dig deeper into the numbers that we hear in our advertising. So here's a chart. I know it's probably hard to see, but this just shows that 6% decrease, and how the red line and at the top and the others just don't meet. The needs versus the funding amounts are just continuing to not catch up with one another. Also, when we look at funding in our state, this is from the Education Law Center out of New Jersey. They're a national nonprofit that works on education funding. They're one of our funding partners through the peer network. And so when they run the numbers, they're the experts in this. They have in their calculations show that funding levels have decreased approximately 10% when we adjust for inflation. So that is just continuing to show that we are decreasing in our funding. We are 48th in the nation in funding level. We are about $4,700 per pupil below the national average when we look at per pupil spending. The one that gets me the most, this is the statistic that makes me mad. Well, there's a lot that make me mad, but this one is particularly egregious. When we look at the funding effort, this funding effort is the best apples to apples measurement between states to be able to look at the funding amounts of how much we spend on education compared to our state's gross domestic product. How much are we producing and earning as a state? How much are we spending on education? And that gives us an apples to apples comparison. When we take that funding and look at it, we are dead last. North Carolina is 50th. Every other state spends more on education as percentage of their state's gross domestic product than North Carolina does. We have the money. It is not a money issue. It is an issue of political will and willingness to actually invest in our children and education. They are just not willing to invest. So the other piece of this is unmet school construction need. If you've been in buildings lately around the state, you've probably seen buildings that need some repairs. There are just so many of our school buildings that are not meeting health and safety codes, or they're just not quite doing enough. We know with COVID now, the HVAC systems are particularly important. With viral spread and clean air. Our state has about $12.8 billion in unmet construction need when they did the survey in September 2021, which is done every 5 years. The part that's also hard here is that we don't actually know what that full number is, because there are some districts who know their need is never going to be met in school construction because they just don't have the funding in their local districts to be able to support additional funding for buildings. And so they don't even report the full amount of need. So we know that the 12.8 billion is an underestimate for school construction needs across the state. So I think this is the last question here. How much is our state currently sitting on in the bank to be able to spend that they are currently not appropriating and not choosing to spend above and beyond the rainy day fund and the hurricane fund and things like that? Our state, this fluctuates a little bit from time to time, but we're sitting on about $6.5 billion right now of savings that the legislature is just not choosing to allocate to anything, one thing of which could be education to help meet some of these gaps. So with that bleak picture in mind, I want to be able to talk a little bit about the Leandro case, because if you haven't heard of Leandro before, it's a really important piece of this entire equation and situation. If you have heard about it, awesome. Hopefully, you'll be refreshed and be able to explain it to your friends better. So Leandro is the shorthand name for the Leandro, the Hope County Board of Education versus North Carolina, blah, 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 et al. Court case that began in 1994. This case began with these 5 highlighted counties here: Halifax, Hope, Cumberland, Robeson, and Vance. They are all 5 very rural Eastern North Carolina counties who came together, 5 families, one from each county, came together to sue the state in 1994 to say that our state was not providing the sound basic education that our Constitution requires. The history here, and there's a video, I can send a link for you that Every Child has done. It's a great video. But the history is that in 1868, when North Carolina was trying to re-enter the Union after the Civil War, we had to rewrite our Constitution during this Reconstruction period. And some of our legislators at the time were newly emancipated Black men who were elected to the House and Senate in North Carolina as part of Reconstruction. And one of the things that they pushed for tremendously was to have the state constitution say that they must provide the education free of charge to all children in our state, because they knew that education was the key to being able to gain prosperity and wealth as a family and to be able to help their children flourish. So they particularly fought for that. So then in 1994, these counties sued the state saying that they weren't meeting the constitutional obligation. So what we have in one simple graphic here is that currently our education system is in the basement. We are not even in the main level of the school. We are trying through this court case that's been going on for 29 years. We've been trying to climb out of the basement and get to the base level of funding for public education. Our state is not even considering world-class education for our children. We are trying to get to the bare minimum that the Constitution of North Carolina requires. This is nothing above and beyond that we are fighting for. Sadly, that's the case. So the case has gone through the courts. It has gone through the North Carolina Supreme Court, which is as high as it can go because it's a state constitution issue. It's been through the courts multiple times, and again, it has won in the courts. In November of, thank you, Sarah, for that link. You can change your name to Sarah if you'd like. The courts in November ruled again that the state must fully fund the comprehensive remedial plan, which is the plan that was put forth, researched, investigated, put forth a fully comprehensive 8-year plan to get our state to the bare minimum level. That was adopted back in 2021 by the courts. And so it is the law. It is the law at this point. We are finishing year 3 next month of the 8-year plan, and we are still not seeing the progress that we need to be able to meet the constitutional requirement, given the state's lack of funding for schools. So one of the things that I love about the Leandro case is that it focuses on our most vulnerable children. We know that if our most vulnerable children are getting what they need to succeed, then all of our children are getting what they need. And so we focus on the children who are in pre-K, those who from birth to pre-K need that, support to be able to be ready to learn when they get to school. It focuses on our children who experience racial discrimination. So our children who are Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Indigenous, who we know continually have gotten the short end of every single deal in education throughout the country's history. We also focus on children who have disabilities, whether those are physical, emotional, or learning disabilities, making sure that they are receiving the supports that they need to be able to thrive in the least restrictive environment that they can be in for class. We also are focused on children who come from economic disadvantaged families who have not been provided the opportunities and the resources that other families have received. So our children who come from poor families. We also focus, as the case originally began, with those who are living in rural districts, making sure that our rural districts are providing the same opportunities as those of us who live in urban districts. And last, but certainly not least, our children who are learning English, our multilingual learners, our children who we used to call them ESL, or English as a second language. That's kind of an old term now, but our children who they or their families are learning English and making sure that they have access to the education opportunities as well. So I'm not going to read through these recommendations. There's lots of links and information. There's videos we can send you, but this is basically saying we need well-qualified principals, well-qualified teachers, direct resources and opportunities for children, and monitoring to make sure that that continues. So to give you 2 brief examples, you can look up your county's data on our everychildnc.org website. But just to give you 2 brief examples, here's Buncombe County, which is Asheville, the Asheville area in Western North Carolina. When the full 8-year plan is enacted, Buncombe County is looking at receiving $46.4 million a year in reoccurring funding for their education in their district. That's a 30% increase that they are currently owed and not receiving from the state. That's $46.4 million. Can you imagine what a district would look like that received a 30% increase? It would be really astounding. And that's what they're being denied currently, that they're not receiving. Currituck County, on the opposite end of our state, one of the farthest north and east, would be receiving 29% increase in their budget. They would be receiving $8.3 million more, which for that county would be a 29% increase as well. So it varies from county to county. It varies, from district to district, but it's generally about a 30%, 25 to 30% increase that districts would see to help them hire new teachers, provide counselors, support staff, social workers, psychologists, nurses at the recommended ratios, provide instructional assistance for your younger grades, provide professional development, help at-risk children. All of those things would be able to receive additional funding that would be helpful. So as I said, we're at the end of year 3. It ends June 30th with the end of the fiscal year. The North Carolina General Assembly did not fully fund year 1. They are currently still fighting over the funding with year 2 and 3. So the North Carolina Supreme Court, as I said, ruled in November about the amount of money that was needed to fully fund years 2 and 3. So the court ruled and then told the controller, who is Nels Roseland is his name. He's the current controller for the state appointed by Cooper. He was told to write the check and had to figure out, based on the budget that was passed for years 2 and 3, which would have been, I guess, 21 to 23 budget cycle, how much was funded already for the Leandro plan and how much was still owed. Well, Judge Ammons, back in the spring, in March, I think, who's the judge for the case at the moment, ruled that the state still owes $677 million to fully fund the years 2 and 3 of the plan. So we are currently looking at $677 million that are unfunded by our state. The legislature has said they absolutely refuse. And Controller Nels Roseland, who is new in the position as of January, continues to refuse. The previous controller refused to write the check, and she, I guess, retired. And so now Nels Roseland was appointed by Cooper and confirmed by the House and Senate in January. He continues to refuse and has sent a motion back to the North Carolina Supreme Court questioning the legality of all of this. And so that's sending the Leandro case likely back to the North Carolina Supreme Court in July. This is what we're expecting. We don't have official dates yet from the coalition and conversations that we're having, but we're expecting to hear it again in July. Now, the problem, if you've been watching North Carolina election process and the consequences that elections bring, in November, the North Carolina Supreme Court switched parties. So we went from a 4-3 Democrat to Democrat controlled North Carolina Supreme Court now to a 5-2 Republican controlled Supreme Court. Now, we could get into a whole other presentation by the legal experts about partisan Supreme Court elections and that whole process. I am not a legal expert. I can't do that today, but if you have questions, we'll find out the answers. But because our Supreme Court is elected and is elected along partisan lines, the court has flipped. And we know from the comments that have been made in public from some of the justices in the court right now, they want to overturn Leandro. They have said it publicly. And they are looking for any excuse or anything that they can do to be able to get the case back in front of them to be able to undo the rulings. If you've been watching what happened with the voting rights in North Carolina and the gerrymandering and the redistricting, you know that they've already overturned those cases in the last few months. And that's exactly what we're expecting to happen with Leandro as well. So that is not good news, folks. That is really, really not good news, and really concerning for those of us who have been working for years to get Leandro fully funded. That is one of the main reasons we're in a crisis right now, because they're already not doing what's necessary. And now we're facing going back to the Supreme Court, knowing that the outcome will not be in our favor. Nels Roseland has the ability to withdraw his his request to the courts and write the check. The money is in the bank. He could write the check tomorrow. It's really pretty much that simple, but he's not. And so we put in a petition, which I linked to here. We sent a petition to Governor Cooper and Attorney General Steins last week. We hand delivered those last Tuesday, asking them to clarify that it is not a problem for Nels Roseland to be able to write the checks, and that he can go ahead and do it right away. And so we're still waiting for the response from the governor's office and Attorney General Steins' office. There's going to probably be more actions coming as we continue to advocate as a coalition and build the pressure on the governor and the Attorney General around this money before the July case. So just continue to stay tuned to the everychildnc.org website for more information that hopefully will be coming out in the next couple weeks. Now, yes.
Can I have for one quick? I just want to make sure I'm answering this question correctly. You will be able to send copies of these slides out after the presentation, right? So if yes. Somebody registered if you registered and you got the link, then she has your email and you'll get a copy of the slides after. Okay.
Absolutely. Sure. Yes. I will be sending the slides. I'll be sending all the action item links and the full recording of the video from YouTube. As soon as I can get it downloaded and uploaded to YouTube, I'll be able to send that out. So that's the Leandro situation. Now let's shift over to the budget situation. This is the second big thing that we're dealing with right now. If you're not familiar with North Carolina legislative process, right now we're in the middle of the long session of the North Carolina legislature. That's on odd numbered years. And they write the budget for the biennium for the 2 years. So they're currently writing the budget for 2023 through 2025 fiscal years that starts July 1. And the governor put his budget forth in like February or March, early in the spring. The House then went first this time to develop their budget. They brought their budget forth and voted on it in April. And then last week, we saw the budget come out from the Senate, which came out on Monday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They started voting on it on Tuesday morning. It was over 1,000 pages that they were supposed to have read in less than 24 hours that they had to vote on. And it was passed by the full Senate on Thursday. So that is less than a week for any input from any conversation, from any hearings. I mean, they just did not hold a fair process for us to be able to even add input. So when we look at the budget, the 3 budgets that are currently, out there, the governor's budget is merely suggestion. It carries really no weight at this point, but it does provide us with 100% full funding of Leandro. So looking at the governor's education budget does show us the minimum that would be needed to fully fund Leandro. So you see that number here, that it would be about a 12% increase in funding for the public education budget. The House budget comes in at a 0.7% increase in funding, and the Senate budget is negative 2.2% funding for public education. When we as advocates are claiming and yelling that they are trying to defund education, I'm not crying wolf. They are literally trying to defund education. When you present a budget with an 8% increase in inflation and a negative 2% decrease for spending, that is defunding education. Now, where the budget stands currently is that because the House has passed their budget and the Senate has passed their budget and they're different, they are now in what is a conference called a conference committee. So leaders from both parties, so the president pro tem of the Senate, Phil Berger, and the Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, pick people to form a conference committee. It's supposed to be bipartisan. I haven't heard exactly who's on the committee yet, but that's our understanding. Whether that actually means they get a voice in that committee or not is a whole other political process, partisan process. But they get together and hammer out the final budget that will be presented to both houses, both chambers. And then it is a simple up or down vote, no amendments, no discussion, no further committee hearings or anything. It goes to the full House, the full Senate, and they vote it up or they vote it down. So the ability to speak to the budget and be able to influence the budget is right now. That is why it's so important that we have people know what's going on and have you reaching out to your legislators, which we'll talk about how to do that in just a minute. But right now, before the budget is fully brought out and voted up or down, is the time that we can provide pressure through advocacy, because we can't do it any other way at this point. It's all behind closed doors. So when we look at the legislature budgets here for funding, the Public School Forum of North Carolina, one of our coalition partners in the Every Child NC work, they put forth their proposal for funding for teachers at 24.5% of a raise this year, because that's what it would take to get us to the national average. The governor is proposing a 10% raise, an average of an 11% raise the first year of the budget and a 19% raise the second year. The House is proposing a 5% and 9%, and the Senate is a 2% and a 3%. Now, what does that look like, though? Because when we talk about averages, average is a very tricky number, as far as that could mean some get a lot and some get none. And that's pretty much what we're looking at here. So if we look at the current salary, year zero, so a first year teacher would get $37,000 in current numbers. They're looking to raise that in the Senate to $39,000. And they're looking at, let's see, if you've been in education 30 years for the Senate, your maximum would be $54,200. So that first column. So year zero, you would start at 37. They would take that up to 39 is the proposal. So that'd be a $2,000 increase per year. And at 30 years, so a teacher who's looking at retirement would only have been able to increase their salary to $54,200. Now, Kim Mackey, who is an amazing teacher and advocate here in Wake County, has run the numbers with using the 2007-2008 salary schedule that the legislature passed back at that time, running it with the adjustments for inflation and the longevity pay that has been removed from this process. They took away longevity pay. If we just looked at the 2007-2008 salary schedule, year zero this year would be making $42,000. And year 30 would be making $74,000 if we used the 2007-2008 numbers adjusted for inflation and longevity. So teachers are making less than they ever have, even though they're working harder than they ever have. And I see some teachers on here, so I'm confident that they could echo that and give us their own stories of the experience currently. And if we have time at the end, we can unmute and do that. But the thing that really gets me is when we look at the Senate proposal for years 14 to 30. So all of those experienced teachers who have been teaching minimum 14 years, a maximum of 30 years, they receive a $200 a year increase. That's not per month. That's total over 10 months. That's about $5 a week before taxes. That's an insult. To give a teacher a $5 a week raise, it's absolutely unacceptable. And so, those veteran teachers, they are trying to push them out. And they are teachers who we need so desperately to stay in the classrooms, to be mentors to our new teachers. When we do have new teachers coming into the system, they need those mentor relationships. Schools need that longevity of experience. Those teachers are our seasoned veterans who just know what's going on and can really provide that extra support that our schools need. And they're giving them a $200 raise the first year. I think the second year it's $50 because it's $250 total. When we look at Leandro funding in the three budgets, like I said, the governor's budget provides 100% of funding. The House gives us 9% of what's required to meet Leandro in the first year and 6% in the second year. The Senate gives us 6% in the first year and 3% in the second year. This is years 4 and 5. So it's single-digit percentages of the Leandro funding that's required that they're providing. Now we have vouchers, the third piece of this horrible equation that we're dealing with right now. So this is the voucher spending as it's proposed at the moment. The small blue lines you see is the initial voucher of spending when it was put forth originally in the 2014-15 numbers. The next two lines are the 21 to 23 budget is the orange line and what that proposed for spending and the increases. Then the 2022 Appropriations Act that was a budget adjustment increased it further to the light blue line. And then the current proposal in the bills, House Bill 823 and Senate Bill 406 are the red extreme increases in voucher spending that are being proposed. Now, the voucher bills, the House and Senate put forward these identical bills. They've passed both they've passed the House. I think it's passed committee in the Senate, and the Senate is still finishing voting on it, hasn't done that yet. But the other piece of this is even if it doesn't get voted on by the Senate, the same information, the same bill basically is being written into the budget for the Senate. So even if the bill doesn't pass, it is still very likely that the budget will contain funding for these vouchers at this exorbitant red line level. So what is such a concern for the vouchers? There's so many reasons. I should probably do a whole other webinar on why vouchers are such a problem. But looking at a couple of the details, it's more than $52 million a year by the 2032-33. So 10 years, it would go up by $520 million a year. Currently, we only have about 25,000 students in North Carolina who are taking advantage of these opportunity scholarship vouchers. Previously and currently, these 25,000 students had to have come from a public school, with a very few exceptions like entering kindergarten where they wouldn't have been in school the previous year. But you previously had to come from a public school, and you also had to meet income requirements. So you had to be a family who had low income in order to be able to take advantage of these vouchers. That's where they started. There's also a disability voucher that's a separate process, but similar, where you can get money to help fund disability education for students. But the income requirements were a big piece of this. That's how they were proposed, was this is for low income children and disability children to receive, children with disabilities to receive what they needed. Well, these bills remove the public school requirement entirely. So any child who's attending any private school can receive a voucher and not have to just be coming from public schools in order to qualify. The trend in other states is anywhere from 75 to 89% of students who receive vouchers never have attended public school in the first place. So this is having state subsidized funding for children who are opting out of the public system entirely, and that the state would never have to pay for to begin with as a child in a public school. So this is just a pure money grab for these families to be able to help afford the private school that they're already attending. The other piece of it is that the bill, as I said, takes away the income requirement. So any family, regardless of their income, can receive a voucher. And they also, currently the bill, the voucher spending allows for $500,000 a year in advertising for promoting the Opportunity Scholarship Program, because they've never had all of the children take advantage of the program that is available. So they've never given out the full number of vouchers that they had available and allocated for students. So because they're not able to fill the full voucher allotments, they have advertising built in. So that's $500 currently. They're increasing that to $1.5 million a year on just advertising. There's a group, PEF, NC, Parents for Educational Freedom of North Carolina, is one of the groups that's receiving this funding to promote vouchers. And when I went and spoke at the House Education Committee a couple weeks ago to speak out against this, I was one of about 10 speakers who had the opportunity to speak. 3 of us spoke against it. The other 7 were all PEF-NC families who they had recruited and trained to be there to speak up for the vouchers. And so that's one of the big ways that they're working, is they're mobilizing to get people to show up and speak out to tout the benefits of this for their families, to be able to say it's an important thing. With the vouchers, it removes about $7,600 per child from the district that the child is leaving to go to the private school. And it often, because those kids are not coming from private schools, that's just increasing the amount that's taken overall from public schools and being put into the vouchers for funding. When we look at the 10 years that these bills propose, we're looking at $2.23 billion over 10 years to be spent on private schools at the public expense. The schools that can receive vouchers are allowed to choose the students that they take. They are allowed to discriminate based on religion, gender, and disability. They are also allowed to choose they have to test, but they are allowed to choose the nationally normed test that they give. They can give any of them. And the test results are not public information. They can be shared with the state if the state ever comes asking for it, but it's not required. And we have no way to be able to get that data. Plus, because they're not giving a standard test like the EOGs that our students are taking in public schools, we really have no way to do an apples to apples comparison to show what these children are learning. Because they're allowed to discriminate against students with disabilities, they often just don't accept these children. The Advocacy Bites podcast that our friends Susan Book and Renee Seckel put out this week, I'll link to that in the information I send you. It's a really great exploration of the situation with vouchers for children with disabilities specifically. Plus, when students with disabilities leave the public system to go to private schools, those private schools are not required to admit them, not required to keep them if they do admit them, and are not required to meet IDEA federal protections for children with disabilities. So they're giving up their protection rights from the federal government to attend these schools. So they don't have to provide speech or occupational therapy or aids or have wheelchair ramps or do anything like that. There's also the largest majority of these are religious schools. So 90% of the children who take advantage of vouchers are going to religious schools. 75% of the schools that are accepting vouchers are religious schools. And churches are not required to abide by the ADA. So when I say they don't have to have wheelchair ramps, they literally don't have to let the kids in the building. They are not legally required to make accommodations to get the kids in the door. And 75% of these groups teach a biblical curriculum, which the Duke Law Center has a study they've linked to. And those standards do not meet our state required standards for what is supposed to be taught and what kids are supposed to learn by the end of each grade. So they can teach anything they want, any way that they want, with any teachers that they want. And there's no accountability for that public tax money that's being spent. And we often hear that, private schools do a better job, kids learn more. Well, when you're only looking at the cream of the crop kids who would do the same in a public school, and you have no kids with disabilities, no kids who are dyslexic, no kids who have ADHD, no kids who are in wheelchairs, no kids who are having any type of learning, emotional or physical disability, and you're comparing them to children who come from really high income families often, you're not comparing apples to apples. And so, of course, the kids look like they're doing better when public schools are required to serve every child. And therefore, the scores aren't always as high, but that doesn't mean the public schools aren't doing a great job. So what do we do about it? I love this quote from Cornel West about justice is what love looks like in public. And so, often as an organization that works primarily with faith communities and churches, we do a lot of charity to help our schools and our neighborhoods. We do a lot of providing of resources to help fill in these gaps that are left by the lack of funding from the state. But we really need to add the advocacy piece to be able to fill in this entire picture. So what we are offering tonight is 2 opportunities. One is that Pastors for North Carolina Children has a curriculum we have put together. It is called Mission Amplify. It's a notebook plus full digital copies that teaches your congregation or your faith group or your community group how to begin advocating for schools. Each episode of the 6 episodes this year talk about one of the most vulnerable children's groups. And so you're learning about what their needs are and learning how step by step to write a postcard, who your legislators are, telling them exactly, what you need, what these children need and why it's important to you. It's writing postcards. If you're interested in that, we'll be sending out the information. You can also use your phone, the scanner, the camera on your phone. If you hold it up to the screen with that QR code there, it should pop up. This link should pop up on the screen and you can send me your information. I put together 25 notebooks today, so I have them ready to be able to mail to you tomorrow if you're interested. And so this is some photos from our group at St. Francis that has done a couple writing sessions. Don's on the call right now, leading this at their congregation. So it's writing postcards. It's super simple. We want to send you this material. We want to be able to support your finding friends to help write postcards and let people know what's going on. But the other thing that we want to do is help you tonight to actually take action as well. And so, hold on. Well, I have some links here in just a second. I'm going to drop in the chat and Rebecca can put them in and you can look up your legislator, or if you want to instead write to an education committee member, we have the links to that information. And we're going to invite you to take a few moments to do that writing right now. If you have questions, you're welcome to unmute. We can help answer those questions. But I invite you to take a few minutes to write a card, a postcard, a letter, an email, or make a phone call if you'd rather do that. You can just continue to mute yourself, turn off your video if you want for just a minute, if you're going to make a call, or stay on. But I'm going to be here to just answer questions and support. But we invite you right now to take the last couple minutes of our time together to actually take the action at the moment. I know making phone calls for some folks to a legislator's office is a really intimidating thing. The great thing about doing it at 8:15 on a Thursday night is that we know nobody's going to be there at the moment to answer the phone. So you get to leave a message. So the hope is that when they come into their office in the morning, their mailboxes will be full of messages from our folks saying, please fund Leandro fully. Please don't expand vouchers. Please take action on behalf of our children to invest in their education. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can share some of the links and things, and I can answer questions for you. And the other thing I want to mention before folks go is that the other thing I would like for you to do is mark your calendar for June 21st. Every Child NC, along with our organization and some of our partners, are putting together a really awesome, we're really excited about it, rally to support education. It's going to be on the Capitol grounds, on the south side of the Capitol. If you came to our prayer vigil in August, it's going to be in the same location. We're going to be outside, that's outside the Capitol, outside the Supreme Court for North Carolina, having a rally to support our schools, our children, Leandro, and to say no to the voucher expansion. And then, after that's finished from 10 to 11, we're going to walk the block and a half back over to where my office is, to Edenton Street United Methodist Church. We have rented their large Kerr Hall, and we're going to be having lunch and a party to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of our coalition and all of the good work that advocates are doing across the state. So we really would love for you to bring a group of folks, get a car full, bring the kids. They should be out of school by then. Hopefully grab teachers that you know, anybody that you can find, bring them with you. We are hoping for hundreds of people. And if funding is a concern, when you fill out this link, rebrand.ly/June 21st, there's information there. We have some funding available through our Every Child Coalition to be able to help offset costs for renting a bus or paying gas or anything like hotel room, those types of things. If you need that to be able to participate, we are very grateful to Z. Smith Reynolds and some other funders who have made that possible. So anyways, I'm going to stop sharing for now, and you guys are welcome to come off mute and ask questions. I realized that was a lot of talking. So I hope it was helpful. Karen, I saw your hand up. Do you have a question?
I was just going to make a comment. Yeah, my church had done a little bit with postcards at our retreat, as you know, last fall, and I'm going to reach out again to them to push that a little further. But now I need to go field 2 grandchildren who are quite rambunctious right now.
I completely understand. My husband is at home doing that with my kids right now while I'm in the office because I couldn't do it otherwise. I understand. Thanks
Right.
for folks who have been here tonight. We really
I
appreciate it.
see a question.
Yeah, well, and if you want to stay on, I'm going to be here. I'm going to stay on for a bit, help answer questions, help you write your postcards, help you make those phone calls. If you have to jump off, I certainly understand. But please share the word, help people know what is going on. And please, please, please reach out to your legislators and tell them that you are supportive of public education, investing in our children. It is not a waste of money. It is an investment in the future of our children and in the future of our state. So I'm really glad you were here tonight, and we'll be sending all the materials out over email just as soon as I can get all of this downloaded and uploaded and all that good stuff. So
I think I saw a question, a hand raised. Sue and Brad, did you have a question?
I was just making sure that we are going to be able to share this presentation in any way we can. So we'll have links for that.
yes, absolutely. In theory, it's live on Facebook right now, so you can share it straight from our Pastors for NC Children page. But we'll also put it on our YouTube channel so that you can share that link as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
And definitely make sure you're following on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll try to also have like little snippets of some of these facts like come out in ways that will be easily shareable over the next few weeks as we're heading towards June 21 to get a big crowd there. People need to know this. This is such good information, Suzanne.
It's important. And even as an advocate dealing with this every day, I started pulling numbers last week to get the current numbers and was shocked myself at how bad the budget was. And how bad the vacancy numbers are. I was at field day at my children's school yesterday all day volunteering, which is one of my favorite days of the year. And we're losing 6 teachers next year from our small school. 4 teachers and 2 teaching assistants. And I'm just devastated. Like, they're leaving, and most of them are going to other places, but still, like, it's really scary. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Daphne from Wilmington.
Yes. How are you, Daphne?
I'm fine. I just responded to your email. I didn't see it till today. So I sent you back my address.
Awesome.
But
I will get that in the mail to you tomorrow.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I heard you mention that you're going to be in Wilmington in the next bit. Where are you going to be and when?
Yes, I am coming down. Peter, if you want to give us the details, I'm coming to Peter's church in Wilmington on June 10th, right? Or the 11th. The 11th, Sunday, the 11th.
All right.
Peter,
Yes.
if you could tell him where.
Reverend Suzanne is coming to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Wilmington, and we're located at 4313 Lake Avenue across from the Roland Grice Middle School, very close to Longleaf Park.
Yeah, I've been there.
Excellent. I will send you a message right now in the chat with my contact information in case you need more information.
Right.
We're looking forward to Reverend Suzanne joining us.
Yes, I'll be there that morning for their quest time, which is like their adult Sunday school time, and then be in worship as well. So I'm really excited about that.
Okay.
Sandra,
All right.
do you have a question or comment?
you.
Well, quick comment. I just put a link in the chat to a friend of mine in Charlotte, Reverend John Clegger, and his dad fought against segregation academies. And now he's a wonderful voice in this, but I think it's particularly important for us to tie to this history of racism as people of faith. And I've asked John if anybody he knows preaches on this. I'd love to share that and see if we can maybe get it published, because I'm trying to call my friends who have chosen Christian schools to stand up and say they'll ask the schools to not take the money until their neighbors get the resources they deserve to succeed and their right to a sound basic education. I'm not sure how that's going to fly, but just wanted y'all to know that I'm working on some of that with some of my preacher friends.
Well, we appreciate your efforts, Sandra. It's such important work. And that reminds me, which I didn't really, I could talk about this for hours, but, the history of vouchers are that they came forth during the push against Brown versus Board of Education. That was 69 years ago last week that Brown versus Board came out. And so in the desegregation process, vouchers came forward as a way for white families to leave public schools that were desegregating and begin to attend these private, mostly Christian schools that were pushing segregation. And so we're often calling them segregation academies because that's exactly why they popped up. You see a lot of schools, Christian schools especially, popping up in the 60s and 70s. Even today, there's still a lot of segregation that's happening with this process. And vouchers are a way, a way that was being enabled, and that is continuing. And as people of faith, it is extremely important that we are speaking out against the privatization of public goods, that public schools are a public good, and they are a way that we care for our neighbors and care for our communities. And so the narrative around vouchers and Christian schools especially is very strong from a small minority of very loud, usually very conservative evangelical Christians. And I know from my work that that is not the only viewpoint that is out there. And so it is really crucially important that Christians, especially mainline and progressive Christians, are speaking out saying, you know, this is not something that our faith supports. This is not the way that we understand scripture, and that it is important that we care for our neighbors. And that includes equitable education for every single child in our state. That is a foundational piece of our faith. In so many of the traditional, you know, mainline Protestant denominations, you know, most of our major denominations have taken stands for public education. I can share lots of links with that. The National Council of Churches, the North Carolina Council of Churches, lots and lots of folks are supportive of public ed. But right now we are the quiet minority of voices in the arena, and we need to get loud, because this is not the only viewpoint out there, and frankly we are just not being heard right now, and that is really detrimental to our schools. You know, those of us who believe in the power of public education for building beloved community and caring for those who are most marginalized by the systems of our world, you know, the children who are just continually denied what they need, we have to speak up. There's no better time than right now to do that. You guys got me preaching tonight. This is give me a camera in the soapbox, and I could go on and on, but you know, this is important work, and I'm so thankful that you all are here to help with that. I'm going to go ahead and stop the Facebook share, I think, since we can do that, and then I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording of this, and then